Hello everyone. Thanks for inviting us. Thanks a lot to Merle and to Jürgis who invited us, and thanks a lot for organizing such a wonderful conference. So we have some caveats before actually beginning the conference. First of all, this is a play on words, obviously, on the famous Liverpool chant, but none of us is actually affiliated with Liverpool or actually a fan of Liverpool. I, for one, am a fan of West Ham when it comes to English football. And secondly, this is, and I cannot stress this enough, this is a work in progress, and we are really looking forward to the feedback from you, because we plan on writing at least one paper starting from this. It's an idea that we had for a couple of weeks now, and hopefully with the use of your feedback, we might enhance, let's say, our academic performance with this. So without further ado, our main claims during our presentation will be the following. Firstly, that, well, the looming threat of technological unemployment, which makes a lot of sense in a lot of different types of jobs, is not necessarily as warranted as it is in different niches on the market when it comes to football coaching. And this is another caveat: we will use football in the European sense. We will not use soccer. I have a personal problem with the word soccer. So whenever we're talking about football, we will talk specifically about European football. So our first claim is that head coaches, at least, or managers, as they used to be called in Premier League and in English football, don't have any, let's say, real reason to worry that robo-coaches and algorithms powered by artificial intelligence will take their jobs, and specifically in the next 5 years or so, taking into account the current state of technology. So to a certain degree and to a certain extent, their jobs are safe. And we will address the reasons actually why their jobs are safe really soon. Secondly, however, our hypothesis is that, well, the use of data analytics, artificial intelligence, even robotics will flourish in the next couple of years because, well, it's quite profitable, both from the perspective of actually what it means to play football and coach a football team, but also from a purely financial standpoint. And thirdly, we will address another potential concern, namely what happens when businesses, because football is a business, starts using algorithms, artificial intelligence, and it talks about using robots. Well, some people fear that, well, the jobs that people do, like coaching in our case, might end up becoming less meaningful. So our last claim will be that, well, actually, it might be the case that, well, these new technologies, once used, might even enhance the perceived meaningfulness of being a football coach. So we will basically apply this idea on Liverpool, because Liverpool is known as being at the head front of what using AI and data analytics, using such tools and kits in order to enhance performance. And these two are the two, let's say, architects of modern Liverpool, because as I guess some of you know, Liverpool used to be, well, the most successful club in the Premier League, in English football. They dominated British football in the 70s and 80s. But the last title that they won before, I mean, in not so recent times, it was in the season which ended in '89. Now, something happened in Liverpool, and something happened in the way in which the team is managed in the past decade, which transformed Liverpool into being one of the most successful clubs, not only in England, in the Premier League, but also on the continental level. So in 2012, Liverpool hired Ian Graham. He's the guy in the right side of the image, to head their data analytics and research department. He was previously employed by a different football team in the Premier League, Tottenham Hotspur, from London, but it was at Liverpool that he actually had a chance to flourish, actually. And what's really interesting about him is that he's so passionate about data and algorithms that he doesn't even watch football. So he makes recommendation, and we're going to talk about this really soon, about players who Liverpool should transfer without even seeing them on the pitch. The second architect of Liverpool's success is someone who, at least for the Germans in the audience, is, I guess, really well known. It's the former coach of Mainz and Borussia Dortmund, Jürgen Klopp, who was brought by Liverpool in 2015. And the two of them, and they have this really great relationship. Ended up building this amazing team, which was able to win the Premier League for the first time in 30 years last season, and season before they won the Champions League. Now, let's take a close look at the ways in which data analytics is used in football coaching nowadays, and there are at least three main ways in which data is used. So one way is coaches use data in order to devise things like, well, what fitness practices should their players use? What skills should they practice and enhance, taking into account the position and on the field, on the football pitch that they are employed in, and also things having to do with nutrition, which is really important when it comes to a sport which has become more and more fitness and physical based. A second way in which data is used a lot, and this is significantly more interesting, is in optimizing basically tactics, both pre-game tactics, namely what Jürgen Klopp does before heading forward to I don't know, a match against Real Madrid, or I don't know, Blackburn Rovers or West Ham United in England, but also in-game tactics, decisions that Jürgen Klopp takes during the game in order to enhance the chances of Liverpool scoring a decisive goal, for example, if they need so. Thirdly, and also this is something we will address really soon, data analytics is used a lot when it comes to the ways in which clubs like Liverpool, and they are really pioneers in this, make decisions regarding transfers, decisions which have an impact both on the pitch. So it's obvious why you need the best players on the pitch, because, well, the best players get to score goals, or if we're talking about defense, to make clearance shots, and then to keep clean sheets if we're talking about goalkeepers, but also financially. Now, when it comes to tactics, the thing is that, well, modern football, as opposed to, well, how football used to be played and coached and managed a century ago, relies on, well, processing a tremendous amount of data. Just think about the following hypothetical example. You're the manager of Liverpool in our case, and you need to pay close attention to all of the things that the players are doing on the pitch. But you need to pay close attention both to what your players are doing and also to what the other players are doing. So, for example, you need to take a closer look at whether or not your midfielders have a high accuracy for passes, whether the fitness stats of your players and also of the opposite players are so, whether, for example, your players are able to cover a lot of ground, and that's especially relevant if we're talking about fullbacks or defensive midfielders. If we're talking about defenders, we look at the amount of successful tackles that they have during the game. And these are just some examples of the data which head coaches have to process in order to take better decisions, both during a game, but also when preparing the tactics against a specific team, right? Because different teams have different philosophies of gameplay, and you need to study the ways in which players play football, and the opposing managers devise tactics in order to enhance the chances for your team to win or obtain a positive result. Now, the thing is, taking into account the amount of data that head coaches have to process, the thing is that, well, it's really difficult for a football coach to actually be able to do that. There's this seminal study from 1986 published by Franks and Miller. According to them, well, football coaches have this significant problem of remembering everything that happens on the pitch during the whole 19 minutes of a game. For example, they say that when it comes to the first half of a game, they can remember less than half of the things that happened in a correct way. And it's obvious why not remembering correctly what your players are doing or the opposite players are doing will negatively impact or affect the chances of your team winning. And this is where data analytics comes in hand. Now, as we earlier mentioned, data analytics is used a lot in transfers, and this is where this has been pivotal in the success of Liverpool. So 8 years ago, due to the data endorsed by Ian Graham, Liverpool buys Philippe Coutinho, who was an integral part in Liverpool in the following seasons. They bought him for 30 million euros, and they sold him for 135 million euros 5 years later. And what's interesting here is not just that they sold Coutinho for such a staggering amount of money, right? But it's also the way in which the team was able to use that money to actually make the team even better, right? Because you might think, well, the team lost such an integral part of their starting lineup, right? It's someone worth 135 million euros. But the thing is, using again data and data analytics, Graham suggested to Jürgen Klopp and to the management of Liverpool to buy this wonderful center back called Virgil van Dijk, who's basically the best center back in contemporary football. He's now injured, but he still is the best. Who played basically every game in the season in which they won the Premier League, and who is an integral part in their starting lineup. The same is true for another iconic player, Mo Salah. You might have heard about him. They bought him for, peanut money, I would say, 42 million euros. And they bought him because specifically the data analytic model employed by Graham said that, well, Salah would be really good if he would be paired with Roberto Firmino, who is an attacking player at Liverpool. And they actually were one of the best, and they still are one of the best pairs in contemporary football. And just 2 years later, in 2019, according to Transfermarkt, which is one of the go-to places if you want to see how much football players are worth, Salah reached basically a peak market value of 150 million euros. Now, taking into account the way in which data can be used in what head coaching a team means and what managing a football team means, and taking into account the fact that we're talking about data, it's obvious that we can ask, well, if football is so data oriented, then why not have, well, in the near future at least, robo-coaches? And this is something that the CEO of a company which partnered up with Liverpool in 2019 actually said. He said, well, when it comes to football, basically, they can actually even create robo-coaches. You will not need actual human coaches in the future. Football teams can win just by the use of robo-coaches because, well, football is basically applied data in a way, right? Now, our first, well, let's say, normative stance, normative claim is that, well, such a worry is not necessarily warranted, and that Jürgen Klopp can be relaxed at least for the time being, because in order to answer this question, whether robo coaches can displace human coaches, we first need to look at what are the skills and abilities needed to be a coach. And even a good coach, right? Because teams would like to hire the best coaches available. Now, skimming the literature and browsing it, we found this map of three of the main skills and abilities that a coach needs to have in order to be a coach, and a good coach also. He or she should show administrative leadership and psychological insight. And this is something that's really relevant when it comes to Jürgen Klopp's approach to what coaching means, because he focuses a lot on his role as a mentor in relation to the players. It's also a question of being able to make long-term and short-term planning. And according to Stendhal and Hempstead, it's also a question of accountability. Now, our claim is that when it comes to long-term and short-term planning, that's something that a robo-coach powered by AI algorithms could reasonably, in the foreseeable future, do. If coaching would involve only this, then sure, we might have robo-coaches employed by Liverpool and Jürgen Klopp getting fired. But the thing is, it's not so likely that that will happen, because we should need to look at the whole picture. So our claim is that, well, Klopp's job is basically probably safe, because remember what we earlier said, coaches need to be accountable for their decisions and accountable also for the results of the football team. Now, the thing is, and I guess a lot of you know this seminal famous paper written by Matthias in 2004, where he talks about this responsibility gap when it comes to decisions which AI take. Now, the thing is, at least taking into account what we know about artificial intelligence, it doesn't actually make sense to talk about holding robo-coaches powered by AI algorithms accountable, right? Accountability means something when we talk about human beings, about moral agents, but not when we talk about potentially artificial moral agents like robo-coaches could become. Secondly, when it comes to coaching, we might use some insights from, well, one of the most famous coaches of the ancient world, right? Aristotle used to coach Alexander the Great. And if the purpose of coaching was for, I don't know, making Alexander the best manager of armies, then, well, he was kind of successful, right? Now, the thing is, if we look at Aristotle and we think about, well, what sort of knowledge does a coach need when it comes to coaching? Aristotle makes this famous distinction between episteme and between theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. Theoretical knowledge is called episteme, and practical knowledge is distinguished between techne and phronesis. Now, our claim is that robo-coaches might achieve something close to techne. They might have some sort of a craft. They might mimic some sort of a craft, which would make them able to take decisions during a football game. But when it comes to techne, what we evaluate is the end result, not the process which made the result possible. So think about the following example. When we look at a chair, we're focused on, well, how the chair looks like, and not on the process that made possible the chair. Now, the thing is that when it comes to football and football coaching, we think that we should also look at the implications that phronesis has with regards to this specific job, because a lot of the decisions that football coaches have to take both during a game and even before a game have moral implications. So it makes sense to say that, well, coaches need to have the practical wisdom, need to be virtuous in order to be coaches and also good coaches. As an example, think about the following hypothetical scenario. A robo-coach substitutes a player during a game. Now, players are generally annoyed when that happens because they might feel that the coach that he deserved more time on the pitch, and the coach behaved unjustly towards him. And the thing is, it's kind of impossible to imagine that a robo coach, which cannot have phronesis in the sense in which Aristotle has labeled it, can actually explain, for example, to that football player why he took that decision, why the decision was just. And saying this, it leads us to the third aspect of the problem, namely this issue of trust between players and robo-coaches. Robo-coaches might actually lack what we find really important, namely leadership skills. Robo-coaches cannot be, for example, mentors to their players because they lack the psychological traits necessary to do that, traits which Jürgen Klopp, on the other hand, actually has. And it's also a question of understanding, not only when it comes to decisions involving justice as a virtue, but also of, well, actually understanding why, as a football player, I was substituted, or why I wasn't fielded in a specific game. Because The question is, and this is something that has been addressed even in earlier presentations, can robo-coaches actually be anything other than black boxes? Can we actually understand why a robot powered by AI algorithms would take a decision and not a different one? Okay.
Okay, I will try to be like really fast with the next part of the presentation that deals with the meaningfulness of coaches' jobs. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, I will start by saying that the discussion about meaningful work is very complicated in the realm of normative theory. So we found that in this particular case, it is much more informative to identify the traits that the individuals find to be meaningful through the empirical studies in this field. But the core assumption that we have is that individuals are valuers, that meaningful work is an intrinsically subjective concept, and that each and every one of us is actively engaging in this process of co-creation of meaning. So we cannot say that we have a normative account of meaningful work. We can only say that we can conceive meaningful work as a response-dependent concept. I will not dwell on that, but for the purpose of this discussion today, we adhere to an autonomy-based account of meaningful work. Please go to the next slide. Okay, so we opted for this account of meaningful work because the empirical studies in this field point to a strong correlation between autonomy and those jobs that are rated as being meaningful. Autonomy is cherished by individuals because, of course, it allows for self-expression, control over the work content and process, and the ability to choose how and when to apply different skills and capabilities. The threat that comes from new and emerging technologies, in this particular instance, of course, data analytics, other sorts of AI applications in this field and mobile robots, is that it appears to be a condition when where the autonomy of individuals, of coaches, is undermined, because their behavior is going to be, or appears to be, regulated by forces that are overimposed, right? As in the case of heavy top-down management. And this actually affects, actually distorts a lot the perceived meaningfulness of one's work. To the next slide. Okay. So in this theoretical context, our question is if we're going to have more or less autonomous coaches. If autonomy is so important for the perceived meaningfulness of one's work, then the answer here is crucial in order to say if Klopp's job is going to remain as meaningful as it once was. But what we observe when we look at these technologies is that actually we can talk about a kind of human cognitive enhancement, because they augment the cognitive capacities of coaches. And they fall under this general description of cognitive enhancement. In this particular case of cognitive enhancement, some authors believe that autonomy can actually be enhanced, that individuals' autonomy is not undermined by these interventions that are non-invasive and non-medical. They are basically technological technological enhancement. So the type of autonomy that is relevant for football coaching, that pertains to decision-making autonomy, appears to be enhanced. And now this reasoning ability and the ability to make informed decisions and better decisions is fundamental to any mainstream account of autonomy, right? We have a minimal a minimal account of autonomy here, but this is the type of autonomy that is actually important to coaches in football. So if cognitive enhancement is designed to better our cognitive and reasoning capacities, then of course, the enhancement of one's autonomy is a byproduct of these interventions. So our second conclusion in this presentation is that, in fact, it is very likely that Klopp and other football coaches are going to perceive their work as being a lot more meaningful than it actually used to be, because they will be able to make better decisions, right? If they integrate these new technologies into their ways of coaching and conceiving strategies on field and outside the field. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for taking so long with the presentation.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. You were actually perfectly on time, so no worries there. And we do have a couple of questions if you still have a few moments left. Sure. One is that you mentioned that the AI database analysis might be just supportive of the coach, but isn't there also a way for the coach to find more meaning both before and after, in the sense that there might be some pre-selection of the data going into the algorithms going on, as well as some potentially necessary translation of the results to the players in the current setting?
Do you want to take this?
Could you maybe please rephrase it? I didn't fully understand the implications of it. So could you maybe rephrase the question?
Yes, of course. I was wondering whether the sense of autonomy or meaningfulness of the job could also come with a transformation of the specific tasks within the job, in the sense that there might be, for example, some data pre-selection necessary before feeding them into the algorithm, as well as translation capabilities of the results the algorithm analysis obtained to the players in the field.
So, I mean, yeah, in a sense, you're dependent on, I mean, any head researcher of a data analytics department in a football club is dependent on the data, and the decisions which the department takes is dependent on the data which are fed into the algorithm. And the thing is, well, you should make sure and make possible that any biases whatsoever are not within the system. So don't be biased against players from I don't know, Ukraine or Romania or stuff like this, because this will negatively impact consequently the decisions that football managers will end up taking in the future. But your question, I mean, the question made me think about this, whether or not this basically makes the people who are in charge of the data analytics team as the actual real assistant coaches, and hence puts more pressure on them in basically doing a better job in selecting data and filtering it to the head coach in order for those data to basically enhance the reasoning capacities that football coaches need in order to make better decisions on the pitch.
In the chat, there's another question for you that basically starts from the hypothesis that if we were to replace all human players by extremely well-played, well-constructed robots, then no one essentially would watch it anymore, because the person asking the question gave the example of AlphaGo, making it pretty pointless to watch two computers play against each other, and then asked whether this wouldn't extend to coaches, referees, and so on, whether taking more and more human elements out of the game wouldn't take also the fun out of watching the game.
That's a really good point, right? Just look at the reaction that a lot of European football fans had a couple of days ago when some football clubs tried to change not the nature of the game per se, but the way in which it's institutionally organized, right? It basically triggered this humongous backlash against people trying to change something that works fine, which is something which a lot of football fans tend to think it's intrinsically good. So taking this intuition when it comes to using technology in this way, so substituting football players for robo players, right? Instead of Messi, robo Messi, and robo Ronaldo, or something like this. Instead of referees, robo referees, and so on and so forth, would basically take the fun out of the game. But at least, and this is my opinion, maybe Anda has a different one. I guess that when it comes to referees, it might make sense to do that because, well, or at least to integrate more robo aspects when it comes to refereeing, because referees are oftentimes biased. They are also unable to process all the data in their surrounding environment. So it kind of makes sense, at least in a way, for referees to have assistant robo referees in order to take better decisions when it comes to deciding whether it was a foul, whether it was an offside or something like this.
But doesn't take the communal arguing about the bad decision and all the drama caused by it from the referee, some of the fun out of the people watching the game and discussing it.
But it takes part of the fun.
In tennis, right? I mean, in tennis, the referee's decision is basically, right, supported by images and data that is available at the moment. In football, we don't have that. But it has the ability to make the game more fair, more just. So it can enhance the gaming experience, I believe.
I feel this. Yep, please.
Just a sec. Sure. I mean, let's think about the famous moment during the World Cup final between Argentina and England, right? The famous hand of God moment. So sure, Argentinians were really happy that the goal was allowed. But the English weren't so happy about that, right? So sure, for some of the individuals involved, yeah, it's good that we have moments like this in which we do allow failure, let's say, epistemic failure to triumph. But I'm not so sure that all the individuals who are involved in this beautiful game would agree with this all the time.